So here we are, folks. Welcome back again. Susan Halford joining us, and this we've heard about a bit about her own identity, her own journey in terms of started out in poultry, grading eggs. I think you grade eggs. You don't like size them. You grade them, and then secretarial college, and then working with figures in some way, shape, or form. And then we also heard about how Susan came to faith, was brought to church as a young one, was raised in church, and as a teenager kind of drifted like a lot of us did during teenage years, but then kind of church became a bit more important to her as she looked at raising her own children. And then there was a big story there, amazing story. If you've just clicked on part 2 and you haven't seen part 1, go and look at part 1, because it's an amazing story about the kind of conversations that took place and the impact of reading the gospel and how that had an impact on Susan's life. But here we are, and now we're going to look at faith and life in the church. Now, I have before me not only a local preacher, not only the local preacher secretary, but also one of the local preachers tutors. So I'm going to ask a straight question here, and I want to ask the question. So I believe in Jesus. Why do I have to go to church?
A little question then.
Well, I ask it because I think one of the reasons that we're mentioning church is because of the connection between the two. But we're aware that lots of people have said to me, "Well, I believe, and I believe in Jesus. You may well, but I'm not sure why. Why do I need to go to church?" So you can solve that problem for us now, Susan. What would your initial response be to somebody asking that question?
I think we need the encouragement from each other. Kind of being a Christian on your own is very difficult to keep going. You need somebody to be alongside you, to hold you accountable, to journey with you. It's very difficult to be a disciple on your own. Jesus gathered the disciples around him. They journeyed together, they talked together, they shared life together. And that, for me, the church has all been about the people that I'm walking with, people I'm walking alongside. The small groups that we've been part of. Very early on, I started meeting in a small group after I become a member, but also the people who actually told me about Jesus initially, they also invited me along to a prayer group with them, which I was able to meet during the day at that time, as we had our own business, so I could be a bit flexible. And they were praying in tongues, and they encouraged me to. They said, tongues is a gift from God. Like any gift, you just have to ask for it. So ask God. And I was very unsure whether I wanted this gift or not. But thought, okay, here goes. And we were just praying, and all of a sudden my bottom lip started to quiver, and I was speaking words that I didn't understand. And I didn't know at that time, but that was the last time I was able to meet with them, because shortly after that, I got a full-time job. So I wasn't available during the day. And I think God knew that I needed that gift to keep me going during that time. I ended up on my knees one night just praying, and all of a sudden the words were just over and over again. I was saying these words, and I knew what they meant. And I started saying, I love you, Lord. I love you, Lord. And it was like it was bubbling up from inside me. It was just totally overwhelming. Such a deep feeling of love, of peace, of joy. It was just amazing.
And it's it's really refreshing to hear you talk about. And I'm going to come back to a point about it's difficult to be a Christian on your own, but I'm going to stick with this thread. It's really refreshing to hear you talk about the spiritual gifts, because I don't think we talk about them enough. But one of the things I recognize is that a gift like that, a gift of speaking in tongues, and discerning our gifts, sometimes it's a lot easier to discern what your gifts are, and I think to be open to how you're feeling in a smaller group of Christians meeting together. And you mentioned the small group. So for you, the small group, if I were to say, and this is a false sort of kind of presentation here. No, there cannot be a right. If I was to say big church or small group, which one would you immediately go, I definitely don't want to lose that?
Small group.
Small group, yeah.
Small group, every time.
But it's interesting, but you are committed at the same time to what we might call, big church, big Sunday worship. But the small group has and that's part of our history, isn't it? I mean, certainly within Methodism, the power people first was sustained by small groups. So you found that very helpful. So what kind of small groups have you been involved in since your membership, I guess, was the first one? There's a small one, you and another gentleman and the minister.
Yeah.
I think small is beautiful, place where all kinds of questions can get asked. But just trace through some of the small groups that have been really helpful that you've been part of.
I was part of the small group with the minister at that time. He led the group. Then when he moved on and we had a new minister, and she was very much into small groups, Brenda Woods, and she started Disciple in both Crowland and Deeping's other church, and she led two groups. There were 13 of us in the group, and we did it over 18 months.
Wow!
The course where you read a large percentage of the Bible during it, and there's quite a bit of preparation. But she also encouraged. She led three. Then she had somebody come alongside her, and then they took over and with somebody else alongside them, and so on. So everybody in the group at some point led the group as well. So she was very much encouraging people to lead as well, and that was quite significant, because she also encouraged us to come alongside her and look at planning services. So before the circuit started talking about worship leaders, she was actually encouraging us to worship lead.
And I think it's very fascinating, and it's clear when we look at our history as well, that the small group becomes a place for early mentoring. I mean, things like having the confidence to read out loud, and also you'll spot easily in a small group if somebody's struggling with their reading. I've definitely known people where that's become obvious, and then somebody else in the church has taught them to read. And even in this day and age, I can think of somebody 5 years ago. I've been here for sort of 7 years. I can think somebody about 10 years ago that I was journeying with, and people became aware of that. So it's actually it's about it's that space where people get to share honestly what it feels like to journey in faith and to pray through problems and to discern the way ahead. But also it's a really big confidence building kind of place. So that's one of the first ones, the Disciple group. I remember Disciple when it came along. It was really, really popular. So what other groups have you been involved in then?
I think not just the small group, the actual because I used to go along to Dogsthorpe as because they had the fourth Sunday celebration, and used to sing with them, and actually being part of the band as well. Singing, that was a big encouragement to each other, because we'd support each other in prayer.
And there is something about that. I used to play. I've got a trumpet down here. but my lips are like liver. It will take me about 6 months to even get ready, and there's not enough space in the studio here to even get it out. But that's something else. But when I did play and sing with a smaller group of people, because everything that you're singing is an act of worship in a sense, you know. I did find, and also you invariably end up sharing your lives with each other, because it's so and so can't make it today because they're unwell. All right, why are they unwell? Let's just remember them in prayer, or something else has happened, or they've started a new job. So you actually end up doing life together as part of a band. I'm conscious also you're involved in, most recently with me, you were so kind, and it was actually with Stephen just before I went on sabbatical to help out with Explorers in Crowland, which was, we were looking to kind of do church in a different way, and you're still involved with Explorers, and then that went online.
Yes, we meet on Zoom now, you know.
And how's that going? Is it
the only way that we could keep going? It's quite a small group. We've got the same people are there virtually every time we meet. Yeah, we have some good discussions. We've been using the Bible Society life material.
And it's interesting that what the clue is in the name, isn't it? Although we started out Explorers thinking, well, let's just do church, you know, in a different way. The clue of small group is in the name. Small is beautiful. In fact, if it gets too big, it's a bit of a problem. And you mentioned that earlier. But what interests me because I still get the invites for it, and if I had the time, I would love to. I mean, my area of ministry kind of shifted quite a lot. But you still see people for whom it is really, really important. It is, you know, it is sustaining them in a really, and also, you know, when I look at who, you know, sustaining them in their mission, and that people are very involved in the community, and you know that is something that appeals. So that's good. And then there was a new group that started, I think, with Nikki Ward. Nikki, who's sort of, we shared with us before. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, there was a group we'd been meeting for a long while, but with varying people having children, and there was a family that split up. We stopped meeting as much. We did try to get it going again by just meeting at one person's home for those who could meet. We were only meeting monthly, but as soon as we hit lockdown, we all started talking to each other and saying it'd be great if we could meet up. Yeah, we're missing each other. And we started meeting on Zoom weekly. Right.
Yeah.
So we don't miss many weeks, other than when things like circuit meeting clash with it, because we meet on a Thursday.
Yeah.
But, it's been really good, and we've got a WhatsApp group, you know, for the house group, which we're constantly sharing prayer needs and sharing good news and bad news, and you know, we just support each other. We're all there to pray for each other.
And I think that's one of the things that has been amazing about the lockdown. I mean, the virus has been a nightmare, but the lockdown itself has been amazing, because for ministers like me, we've always been keen to focus on mission. We've always been keen to try and get the church to look outside of itself and think about continually about how it serves the wider community. There was the old adage, for goodness sake, will somebody unlock the doors of the church and let the people out? And even I remember times when we've always had a focus on encouraging small groups. Historically, it's been with us all the time. It's as if we were at a point where we had big church, but actually in the main, we'd lost a lot of small group kind of structure. And that's the very thing that we were built on. And where people can really be nurtured, because you can get in-depth relationships, meaningful relationships, you know, that kind of work there in that small group setting. So from my perspective, I can even remember times in Lent where we were sort of, what would it be like if the church was actually closed and we had to be out serving the community? And then suddenly the pandemic comes along, which is horrific. And, you know, but in terms of lockdown, okay, we can't serve in quite the same ways as we would want to do in our community, but the food banks have stayed open. the night shelter is existing, but in different ways with a lot of help. People are still being helped to find accommodation. Support services are still there. In fact, we've expanded, I'm sure you might have heard, we've expanded the number of activities that are done under the umbrella of support during the lockdown. I mean, that's an interesting one, training people, to and mainly in helping point people towards mental health support, so actually, and then the live stream has been the other thing, this resurgence. And it was Jeffrey Clark, the URC moderator from the East Midlands Synod, and he was saying, and I have to sort of saying as well, that what it's done is it's brought Christianity into our homes, back into our homes. Spiritual discipline, there are people we weren't praying every day of the week before necessarily as a group, and now I know not everyone's got access to the internet, but we've got morning prayers. Not my routine's completely changed, thanks to Matt, by the way, for the Tuesday mornings, which gives me a bit of a breather. But suddenly all that's there, and then this resurgence of when I look at live stream, I see people interacting and giving in very vulnerable ways, sharing their vulnerability, and then we move on from that because we've got so much happening. It's difficult to keep track of. We've got Zoom worship happening within local churches that you've kind of described already. I've still got Facebook Live happening. That's another thing that's happening in local churches. And then again, you talk as well about WhatsApp. I mean, that's another thing. I've got so many WhatsApp group on my phone. The only thing is that I have to kind of keep checking because otherwise I like to be part of all WhatsApps. If you put me on, it's not a problem, just so that I know what's happening. And then there's so many accounts to look at, but you can see the vibrancy of the connection between people as they're sharing. It's amazing. So yeah, I mean, what has been your experience of online worship? That interests me because also you've given towards it. You've filmed yourself. Bless you. Yeah. What's been your experience of online worship from just from your perspective?
Well, we've been joining Kingsgate at 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock. And then coming to the live stream.
Yeah, I know.
Methodist Church at 10:30.
I'm finding this out because
we're worshipping more than we were before.
And Janet as well. Janet at Southside, she does a live thing at 9:30, and people come along to the 10:30 from that. I'm thinking, crikey, So there's and that's obviously that's not something you're doing out of service. It's because you want to do it.
But actually, it's not taking any more time.
Right.
Because you're not traveling and you're not staying around talking to people the same afterwards before you come home. It's not taking any longer.
So, and also, I think it's opened up a little bit more. I would like it to see it a bit more balanced, but I think it's opened up our diversity in worship material in our song choices a lot more. I mean, we use I Sing Worship, and we're getting material that is more traditional from other places. But I do feel it's rebalanced actually for me, because if I'm honest, when I can only speak personally, you do your own thing. When I do live stream in the morning, it's the style of music that I do like my hymns, especially sung well, but there's something I also have missed that other style of material that's out there. So I've really benefited from that. Just a final kind of piece of exploration, again, completely unplanned. You'll thank me for that. But I wanted to talk a bit about your role as a local preacher tutor, and also, working in combination with Stephen and helping mentor people through the discernment process. And to say from the outset, I find it amazing when I see people's willingness to step forward and their humility, and also to hear the stories of faith from people when we're at local preachers and worship leaders meeting. Just the privilege of being part of people who are being called and shaped for preaching. Not all of them, of course, it is right for, I think I'm amazed by two things. One, by the loving nature of the process, actually, and there is a testing process. And as I say, there are people who don't quite who think actually this is not working for me, who've got other gifts in other areas. But we have seen people come through. I mean, what does it feel like? What as a tutor when you how do you feel? I'm just thinking, is there any kind of comment that you can make on how in those scenarios you kind of sense God's presence?
Well, it started when we were asked to help with a worship leaders course. And we hadn't realised until the course started that they were also going to provide each worship leader with a mentor, which, you know, we ended up then mentoring the worship leaders. And we got an awful lot out of that. And then when they ran another worship leaders course, we were then asked to run it, Stephen and myself. And then, of course, the local preachers course changed from the old.
I remember that.
To worship leading and preaching. And all the existing tutors for faith and worship all decided that with it now being online and that they would take a step back. And suddenly Stephen and myself found ourselves studying.
Yeah, I remember how it happened. It was an initial, oh, crikey, Riley, a lot of this is online. We're not quite geared for this. And it was a time and opportunity for those who felt they had the time, I think, to step back and for new people to come forward. Although the atmosphere of our local preachers worship leads me, I think I couldn't, so encouraging as a whole group of preachers to new people. But so with the new kind of a refreshed sort of team emerged of people willing to engage online. And so I don't see any of those classes. I just have the privilege of, maybe I've got somebody in mind that I want to ask, but obviously I'm not going to broadcast their name now. And I seem to have their name laid on my heart. But I get the privilege of hearing a little bit about people and getting alongside them as they step forward in their preaching. And then I almost I hand them over and then I'll hear reports back at local preacher meeting, but that's it. But to see people and move on into ministry as well, to that calling. And even isn't it humbling? Remember John, the deacon, who actually did his preaching. The guy's a deacon, but he's not a local preacher. Here we go. So I just find it such a privilege. I mean, what are they like? If we could have a kind of eye into those tutor kind of times, the tutor group stuff. I mean, how do things? Is it a kind of? I mean, what does it feel like? Is it because training has changed, isn't it, over the years? The kind of things people do.
Yes. Well, the course now it has changed completely from when I did it, but it was just essays.
Yeah. Did you do blue folder?
Now they have different mediums, so it can be poetry, it can be a sermon, it can be all age, it can be a reflection on a piece of music or a piece of art. There are so many different things that they can use, and I mean, some of the material that people have produced when they've written a song themselves.
Yeah.
You just think, wow, I couldn't do that.
But I think it lifts a level, doesn't it? It really does. And I think I've always thought if I had the opportunity and the time, I'd like to go back and do the course again. Because I think before the blue folder there were two things happened in the blue folder. One, and the study is definitely still there in the new course. But in the blue folder, it was exegesis. So you look at a passage and it was context and background, original meaning and meaning for today. You would explore that. And then they'd find some way, either an essay or you would say, how would you incorporate this into a sermon? But it was actually very cerebral stuff, wasn't it? And then in the new course, it's actually asking people to apply what they know in ways that would be helpful to people. I mean, I guess initially you might think, would be helpful to people in in all age worship, but it's not about all age worship. It's about people learning different ways and in different illustrative methods and learning by using your hands and craft. So it's amazing. I mean, I would probably either do one of two things. One, I'd have to behave and not to do some kind of mime the gospel in some kind of way that was not, but I can see, the idea of writing a poem about transformation, linking it with I think that's a challenge. It's more challenging than actually just writing a straight sermon. So yeah, really encouraged by that. So I would say thank you so much, Susan, for being so open and sharing. I think the conversation about church in particular has given us some real depth that we haven't had before about what small groups do. And that's really helpful stuff. So you've answered my question. I do follow Jesus, and I've now decided that I will go to church, and I'll find a small group first, of which there are lots of small groups around, folks. If you're interested, I will we'll put some links on the bottom of the video when it goes out. But there are lots of ways to access support and small groups, especially if you're making that jump, perhaps from attending prayers in the morning or live stream worship, to actually thinking, how do I get involved a bit deeper? Loads of opportunity, loads of people out there to help. But Susan, thank you so much for sharing. And I really, really do appreciate it, and really appreciate your time, and wish you all the best as we look to the future, whatever the future holds. It's clear that the Spirit will certainly be part of it. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
There we go.